Welcome to the All Ambient podcast, where we dig into the creative process, hear untold stories, and explore the brilliant minds behind some of the finest ambient music out there. I'm your host, Mike Graff. I'm excited to be in this together with you. Let's get going. Again, welcome to the podcast, everyone. My name is Mike Graff. I make music as Dear Gravity, and man, it is so great to have you here. We are joined once again by a brilliant musician. Chris Bartels has graced us with his presence once more. It's hard to put into words how not just prolific Chris is, but how daring and how out of the box he is willing to think at any given moment. It seems as though there is nothing one can do to stump the creativity of Chris. And I wanted to explore what that looks like on a day-to-day basis and how he keeps himself in that headspace. We talked a lot about inspiration. We got to talk a lot about how to make sure that of all the molds that can form around what we do, how to continually break those molds. It was a fascinating time together. Let's dig right into my conversation with Chris Bartels. Hello, everyone. A familiar face, but certainly one who every time he arrives at the All Ambient podcast just cannot help but be super happy about it. Chris Bartels, glad to have you on the All Ambient podcast once again. How you doing, man?
Good. Thanks for having me back.
Glad that you're back. You and I, we talked about offline just for a second, but you and I have the unique distinction of all the Venn diagrams in the world of, where the two or three overlapping, where we are both, musicians, indie musicians in some of the different same genre spaces. And we both happen to live in the same town, which is pretty great. But also, man, it is kind of fun to be Minnesota sports fans together. I do not get to share that particular passion with,
is it fun?
With anybody.
Is that the right word?
It's, for anyone not in Minnesota who doesn't.
I guess terrifying roller coasters are fun. So maybe there you go.
It truly is. We have of the four main, not including the WNBA, because apparently that team's been doing just fine, even though they just lost this one. But of the four,
it's very close.
The four big franchises, the hockey, baseball, football, basketball, we have won a total of 2 World Series, and that's it. So it's just
my man is saying fun.
Hundreds and hundreds of collective years, seasons, and very little to show for it, but that's okay.
It is fun.
What a ride.
I like being hurt.
What a ride.
I like being sad.
The pain, just the sheer pain of it all. Oh, man. Well, Chris, really glad to have you back, man. Something that I know we want to dig into today, the subject at hand. Without question, you were the first person who came to mind who I wanted to dig through this with. The idea that is something not only that is going to apply to everyone who listens to this, but also selfishly is something that I am personally trying to make sure that I put active effort into so that it doesn't become a problem for me, is the idea of breaking the mold, the idea of being intentional about breaking the mold. And Chris, you have this uncanny ability with the amount of monikers that you juggle across all the different genres and all the different projects and collaborations and all that. I know I talk about it a lot with you, but really I'm just in awe of what you're able to juggle, and not only just by sheer volume, but also the quality that you sew into each of those is just beyond compare. You are just so prolific in that camp. But besides just having all these different touch points, what I hear, and even in the times that we've collaborated together on our different monikers and on things that we're doing, is you have this quality in you where it seems as though, this is just me observing from afar, or even just right next to you, that I can't imagine the last time that you have actively been in a place, in a mindset, or in a moment where you're like, man, I just don't know what to do next. I just don't know what to try. And again, I might be projecting that, but it seems as though whether it is just baked into the Chris Bartels DNA, or if it's something that you are intentionally reminding yourself on time and time again. You have gone to great lengths to be very intentional on breaking artistic molds. And that's not only just trying daring things, but even within each moniker, even within each project, being willing to be daring within those and to not have everything sort of fall into the same sound, the same, just rinse and repeat sort of deal. Yeah. So I wanted to chew through the idea of how does someone who doesn't innately just punch that in the face and say, this is not a problem for me, which truthfully, I think there are very few people who do not at least wrestle with this a little bit. How would you sort of break down your approach on how you keep things fresh, how you try new things, or just the mindset you put yourself in or don't put yourself in as an encouragement to someone who might be trying to figure out what to try next or how to keep things, how to just snap that mold in half?
Right. Yeah. I think maybe for me, it is in a way just baked in there naturally, like you mentioned, only because I see it, the pursuit of all these different styles and trying different things. And like you said, even within each moniker, trying different sounds and whatnot with each song or release or whatever. I think maybe it is a blessing and a curse because it's fun. It's exciting. I'm inspired by so many different types of music. I'm just a music fan, lover. I've been my whole life, and I just feel things. And music does that, I think, for everyone. But like, it's definitely like probably a lot of people that are listening to this podcast, for example, can relate and just go, yes, I know what you're saying. When you just like, it just inspires it. You just feel things. And anyways, so I've felt deeply my whole life with music, and then especially ever since creating. But it's all over the board, I'm definitely in the ambient world, obviously, like with various monikers, and have been for a long time. But I make synth pop vocal stuff. I write folky indie stuff lately. Yeah. I have electronic stuff all over the board because I'm just constantly inspired by different things. So to kind of go back, I think maybe, like I said, the blessing and the curse thing potentially is, as I'm exploring that, it's sort of like I said, it is. There's a lot of exciting things about writing different styles of music and trying different things. And at the same time, it could just feel like I'm overwhelming myself a little bit.
Sure.
And I'm aware of that, and I wrestle with that, but I also just keep diving into different new sounds and new things. And I think how I'm wired, but it is like hard to feel like I'm centralized at certain points. But yeah, I mean, as far as if you're looking to break the mold or like explore, it's probably specific to every situation, but like, I would just go where the inspiration is, for starters. Sure. Like, just speaking for myself, it's like I said, if like I'm a fan of so much different music, different types of music, and from going way back to stuff that is nostalgic, to me, to like new stuff that I'm just discovering nowadays, all over the board. And so like, for me, it's like a certain album like hits me, and it's at a moment in time with where I'm at emotionally, or with relationships, or age, or it's just like you see something in a film, or you go see live music and there's something like special about that moment, whatever it is, like chasing that inspiration, what that does for you as a creator, as a music writer, and then just chase it. It's just like, that's all. Like I said, I'm a mess with my like writing and monikers, and that's like self-imposed, and it's exciting and fun and also messy. Yeah. But that's just like, I just chase the inspiration. And then I have to go back to the studio and write or wherever, and just like chase that and see it as a playground to just like, what does that inspiration look like for me and my writing, and my
I love that
explorations in studio.
Yeah, let's press in there a little bit. I think that's, thank you so much already, but let's go even a little bit more, maybe granular is not the right word, but let's sort of focus in, let's hone in on that. So like, let's talk about maybe Blurstem or Sonant, Elskavon, like one of the monikers that maybe floats a little bit more in like the cinematic meets ambient sort of, with electronic leanings, neoclassical leanings, all that. Like within those monikers, when you are bringing something to life, and perhaps it just, you're feeling like, it's missing something, or I want to try this. Is that the sort of thing where you're like, okay, I want to try this, and then you are actively like sitting there questioning what the next thing should be that you're going to like try to, even if it's just like, let me try flipping this sound of this piano upside down, or let me try adding these new, like sonic textures to it. You strike me as someone who just shoots from the hip in the sense of like, I'm just going to go after this. Okay, try that. I don't know. It didn't work. I'm going to go for this. Again, from the outside, it appears as though there is a method to your self-described messiness, which it doesn't appear as messy to anyone else, which is beautiful. But is there method to that? Or have you kind of gotten yourself to a place where like, I don't know, I'll just literally try anything? Because I think sometimes, and maybe it's just a result of the world of plugins and the world of sample libraries where you can have so much stuff, but then sometimes I start forgetting about all the different things that I have at hand, just to the point where it doesn't even present to my memory as an option on how to work, where is something like, hey, you should probably try that out on this song that you feel is missing a little something. Yeah. Where do you go in your brain to, when something jumps out as you as I need to tweak it? What's the next step there for you? What are you doing?
Yeah.
Is it random? Is it super specific and you've got massive lists of all this stuff that you've researched? What are you doing?
It's a good question. I guess big picture answer to that is I am kind of just winging it. Like, like production wise, or like as far as like, especially if we're kind of in, like you said, electronic ambient world, it is a lot of just truly playground things. But I will say this, I do think it's a playground and I'm winging it and I work pretty fast and I try to like just keep up with where my brain like sends me next with like messing with this sound or this, pulling up this synth and messing with the controls on that or whatever. So again, messiness in that is there. Yeah. But I do think I think the messiness and the playground and the quickness comes, at least a good chunk of it comes from just a foundational, the hours I've put into like honing those crafts,
Right. So, of course. Yep.
So I think that's part of it. Like, I guess maybe I've just put in so many hours on Logic where I am kind of flying by the seat of my pants. And that's usually, not always. Sometimes it's a little more like, okay, well, yeah, like even this morning I was like working on a guitar line and I was playing a guitar line to a synth line that I had written months ago. So I had to kind of totally relearn it and I hadn't played on guitar yet. So that's very much more like, I need to learn where my fingers go to match this note. And it took me a while. There's definitely moments like that where that's not like flying by the seat of my pants. That's like, I need to learn this line on the guitar. That's pretty straightforward. But yeah, a lot of the like sounds and the sonics, and especially with ambient stuff, and what I'm drawn to is just the experimentation and kind of randomness, it seems so. But it is built on a foundation of like, at least some music theory, if I'm guessing in the key of E flat, then I kind of
course,
sort of what chords I'm in or whatever. But yeah, I don't know if that kind of answers, but it is a playground. Yeah, definitely like winging it.
Absolutely. Well, and just to qualify that a little bit, just even using the terms like playground and winging it, what I wouldn't want someone listening to hear is that means that it is less amazing or that it is less important or less consequential when it arrives at the end. To be honest, I think there can be an assumption on the other end of the spectrum where I can only create something that fits within these parameters. Like, give me the right piano sound in order to do this, or give me like my ambient atmosphere has to be a certain frequency. Otherwise it's just not going to be, there can sometimes be these things that aren't bad things to think about, but if they become absolute like horse blinders that you can't see outside of, at that point you're certainly limiting yourself further than you ever should. And so that's when I see you quote winging it, or with, just having, playing around in the playground becomes not like a flippant, like, oh, well, whatever happens, but rather like, hey, there is freedom to explore here. I am not bound by a certain set of rules, but I'm going to run after this and we're going to see what color combinations, what paint color, techniques and all this and that could wind up producing something pretty cool. And
yeah, definitely like a healthy balance of both. It seems like the right kind of, right? Like winging it in a way where you feel that freedom because you feel confident in the skills as with your instrument or with a bit of music theory seems like a healthy balance. And yeah, I don't know. I'm always trying to grow as a musician for sure. And as a producer every day, and as a independent musician, all that, so much room for improvement, but it's nice to in some areas have like the confidence because of just the time I've put in of like, I feel confident to like just throw paint at the wall now because I have a bit of a foundation in this said area or whatever. But.
Absolutely. Let me put you on the spot for a second. Talk to me about when you try stuff. Like, let's say that there's a particular like melody that you're trying to add, or a particular maybe a synth patch, or, you know, like whether it's on hardware or a plugin or whatever, or you're trying out a sample and you're trying to bend it through, you know, your tape machines and all this stuff. How often are you trying stuff and then deleting it because you're like, yeah, that just doesn't fit? Because I know that for me, I'm the kind of person who I have to try like 12 things that I don't think fit before I try the one. Then you have to fight through all those, but then you find the one thing you're like, yeah, that's the thing. And then you go from there. But then I could see the other perspective where it's like, let me just throw this in there. And, you know, I've used even for like songwriting, just little like workshops or little practices. You know, the practice is like find the most annoying synth sound you've ever heard, like just cheesy, wonky, awful, and then proceed to write a 2-minute song that absolutely has to feature that sound as like the prominent, you know, most prominent thing. And you can bend it, you can do all the stuff with it, but you know, when you put the fences around like you have to use this, sometimes it puts you in a different mindset and gets you to think about the whole equation differently. So are you that kind of person where you're like, hey, I just put this down on, I just recorded this into Logic, here's like, okay, it's maybe not in its final form right now, but yeah, we're keeping that? Or are you the guy who tries thing after thing after thing after thing just to sort of find the right, you know, the right vinyl in the crate to match what you're doing and going from there?
Gosh, yeah, great questions. It's probably a little bit of both of all those things.
Sure.
Sometimes I have like, okay, I have a sound in my head that I need to find. Yeah. And then once I find something or I tweak it. But I'm also, a lot of times I'm just kind of like flying through sounds and ideas and then letting my intuition decide like, oh, whether it's a synth preset or samples, or if it's less like digital landscape like that, it's more like, oh, I'm committed to playing this acoustic guitar right now. Yeah. Or this Rhodes piano or whatever. That's a certain sound. But even within those more organic sounds or whatever, it's the part and or the layers. I'm just obsessed with different layers. So it's like layers might be like I'm playing chords on the Rhodes, but then I'm gonna like also just play one note bass and then send that through a bass amp modeler. Yeah. And then I'm also gonna play like just like random sprinkles 2 octaves up and then reverse it and throw a ton of reverb on it. And then that's your soundscape. And all of a sudden I'm using Rhodes piano for like full stereo frequency spectrum things. But yeah, intuition is just huge. I think for me, just when I'm writing, of just kind of finding sounds that inspire quickly and then throwing down things. And what I'm not great at is going back and simplifying, muting things. I do it sometimes, and I'm very proud of myself, and I pat myself on the back when I do, because I don't do it very often. As far as like that kind of like age-old advice of like the key of a song is not like adding more, but it's like less is more, and like taking. Sure. I'm really kind of bad at that. So, but I also embrace the layers.
That was a verbal affirmation that I am in the same camp as you, where I think we both need to perhaps find opportunities to grow in that camp. That wasn't yeah, Chris, figure it out. That was I know. Oh yeah, Chris. Yep, you're in good company.
I just figure, I believe that sometimes less is more, but man, more is fun. So I just have fun with more, and that's can be cool and also not so cool sometimes. But
no, I hear you. It's making the right choice for the right moment for sure. Yeah. Let me. This is going to be kind of a memory lane sort of trip here, but I want to see if we can find something fun within the last, just thinking back on the last couple weeks of you in the studio. Can you think of a time or two, whatever, where if someone was just like watching you on Twitch or whatever, like just here's Chris doing his stuff in the studio, and someone happened to see you try a certain technique or play a certain thing through a certain instrument into a certain, what it wound up becoming, what would be that one instrument or technique or sample or part or whatever that person would just be like, what the heck was Chris thinking. Like it is just so out of left field. But of course, wound up producing some super cool result that became an awesome texture or heartbeat to one of your pieces.
Yeah. Probably stuff I do with vocals.
Sure.
And I don't mean just vocal songs. I mean like using voice for production in vocal songs, but also in ambient stuff or whatever. Yeah, maybe just because back to the playground bit of just like winging like different ideas is, I just find you can't argue with the fact that the human voice is the most unique instrument per se out there,
Right.
For each person. So to blend that in with all sorts of styles is exciting. Anyway, so like the other day I was taking vocals, maybe 8 vocal tracks, right? For kind of quote main regular and then 4 harmonies or maybe some ooze. But then I would print that out, export that soloed, dry, other than maybe like simple EQ and compression as one file, bring that stereo file back in, keep those original tracks there, have the new file sent through like sort of a vocoder situation. I was using Antares Harmony Engine at the time, but there's so many different plugins, whatever, that you can kind of play MIDI that will send, or will be triggered sidechain by that vocal stereo file that you bring back. And then from there, so that then you can have a vocoder situation, but then it's just like, okay, we're just getting started. So then I might throw that vocodered file into Logic Sampler and then chop it up and play bits and pieces of it on the sampler. And then I might take that, reverse it, pitch it down an octave. And then all of a sudden you can mute all the quote unquote normal vocals where you're hearing words in the English language. And all of a sudden you have this trippy, weird, crazy thing, but it's still very melodic. It's still in the key of D major or whatever. I don't know, cassette plugins or after whatever you want to do. So probably that would stand out as like, at least as the most unique finished sound, if you will.
I love that. Well, and this is, I got to be careful on how I say this, because what I don't want it to sound like that isn't an incredible finish line that you arrived at. Like, I don't want it to sound like that just sort of like magically happened and it just sort of randomly fell into place. I mean, those were all like you specifically said, hey, let's do this, and then let's do this. But the beauty of that, like even just you talking about the process of doing that, is that what you didn't say is you needed to go record all of that after taking 15 years of vocal lessons, or you have to make sure that you buy this particular recording software and then spend tens of thousands of dollars on plugins to do this and that. Like what you just wound up doing with those 8 different layers of vocals is pretty accessible to just where we are in this day and age with tech and with being able to get your hands on the pieces that you need. You are just like taking the tools that are readily available and being really, really creative with them. And so again, I'm not reducing the output to something like, oh, well, anybody could do that. But there's almost something like brilliant about the fact that those same resources are just like right there waiting for someone who might be in the middle of writer's block right now. And yet they have, what if they had every exact same plugin and even the same microphone or whatever that you did to just do that whole thing? Sometimes all it takes is just like, let me break off a couple of the restraints that I've had on how I look at a certain way that I do vocals or a certain way that I try to get some sort of vibe for a song going. You're so good at that. You're so good at just bringing something to life through process and technique that isn't just, well, let me buy the most expensive thing and solve it that way. Like I see the ingenuity being the most valuable thing that you are bringing to the table there. And that's such a cool thing, man. Really is.
I mean, thank you. And as you were saying that, like, I for sure, I have some synths and some cool pedals and toys in here. And also sometimes I just like, all that being said, like I use probably like Logic stock stuff more than anything. Where there's like samples. But even break it down even further, like I just did a video with a friend and we didn't even plan this, but like I was going to bring up my Zoom recorder on this little trip we are going to do, but I didn't have it. I was like, oh, shoot, I forgot it. Oh, well, let's just record a bunch of voice memos on the iPhone. And then I made a basically a song built off these voice memos, sampling in like even like rugged recordings of like cars driving over a bridge, and then like using that tone, and then waves on the beach, a sound effect on the voice memo, turning that into a hi-hat because you put on a tremolo at 16th note. So yeah, it not only is it possible to do what you're saying of like work with tools that are just kind of at your disposal, but sometimes it's creatively thrilling and a great idea to just like, oh, let me instead work with what I have here, you know, and it kind of leads to different inspirations, you know, sometimes.
Yeah. I love that. Just for the sake of showing everybody that you're human, because sometimes we need a little reminder. Think of going back to the last couple of weeks. Has there been anything that you have tried that you thought was going to go really well and wound up being like, that just didn't quite come alive the way that I wanted it to? Or maybe you found some way to sort of rescue the situation or you know, approach it a different way that saved it from, you know, the trash can on the Mac desktop. But yeah.
Every day I just block them out of my memory. No. I mean, for sure. There's so many times where I just like, I have the amount of like unfinished ideas I have sitting on my hard drive is significant. Like I just have so many that
you have like at least 4 or 5. Yeah,
just tons. And which is fine, you know, like I think sometimes I get frustrated because I'll be like going back to like the first conversation. It's like I'm constantly just like jumping to different things. Yeah. Like we said, that's fun and great and also messy and all that. So if something inspires me, I might like, okay, I got to like write something kind of inspired by that right now.
Yep.
And then sometimes that works out and then other times it just doesn't. And it's just like in the moment, it's just like, I got something down. I laid down a drum beat in a you know, synth line, but like it's just not. So yeah, that happens all the time. I mean, yeah, I kind of look at it like it's never really a waste, just because even if like something won't ever get finished and won't ever like that hour I spent on that, it's still like a learning lesson in some way, or I'm still like messing with the skills or the sounds or the instruments or whatever.
Absolutely. Well, and that, I mean, that ties back with what you were talking about earlier, where when you're kind of just like flowing in the moment and you know, just whatever sort of ideas come to you on how you want to play with the sound, with the texture, with the melody, with whatever, the practice of just continuing to create and continuing to try things out and to just, again, like build up this list of, you know, just this whole folder of sessions that may never be published, that, you know, the ideas may never see the light of day, but just even, you know, I like to be specific. Maybe there was a certain like saturator plugin that, you know, that felt really cool and you were playing around with it on this particular synth or whatever. And there was something, it just didn't quite hit and you were just monkeying around with it for a while because it was fun, but you know, that will never see the light of day. But then cut to a couple months down the road and you have this guitar part that you're laying down and you're trying to just give it that extra little something. And then all of a sudden it come back to like, man, what about that saturator plug that I was messing around with on that synth that let's just give that a shot. And that investment of time months earlier on something that publishing wise will never be distributed out there. But yeah, you're totally right. The lesson was there. The education was there. The time was valuable because now you're able to breathe some life into this thing that maybe this thing does live and it goes out. Yeah, there is nothing is wasted.
Yeah, you can always pull in a sound or something too. Import that track, or like even just like I liked the snare on that, but the rest of the song was crap. Like I'm going to use that snare that I used 6 months ago on this, and it's perfect or whatever. Yeah. Talking about snares on all ambient. That
is that allowed? Is that sacrilegious? Yeah.
What am I saying? What am I saying?
That reverb at 95%.
That Valhalla preset. There we go.
Hey.
None of this snare talk.
There we go. That's maybe we'll get our commercial payout. We've said the word Valhalla a couple dozen times. It's great. Love you, Valhalla. Okay, to try to tie a bow on all of this, try to wrap it up, but it is a little bit of not a tangent, but I would just kind of maybe expanding the conversation a little bit as we wrap up. With all of your different monikers, again, I love the exploration and your continuous creativity, imagination, curiosity, being willing to explore. What does the line look like for you where just the idea of having like Elskavon per se, or let's take I mean, you just pick one of your monikers, but Elskavon or otherwise, what is the line of you sort of establishing the sound quote of Elskavon versus trying new things and expanding the sonic world of each of your monikers? Because it is kind of a dance, and I understand that. And I know that you have the ability to play around in whatever moniker you want to at any given point. But once you've established the moniker, what does that conversation look like in your head when you're trying out stuff, when you're figuring out what works and what doesn't work? How does it factor into the fences that you put or perhaps don't put around each of the monikers that you are creating music as?
Yeah, it feels like you're living inside my head, because that's just like a constant thing I wrestle with, like
Sure.
As far as thinking about that, not thinking about that, like overthinking it.
Yep.
Yeah, Elskavon's a great example for this question, just because like I'll go way back. I had a band, and then that was just the thing, like way back. And then Elskavon was the very first off branch, the very first second moniker, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so at the time in my head, I'm going, the band was like, whatever, garage rock, indie rock, into the Strokes and Weezer and things like that. But I was like newly in love with instrumental cinematic ambient music.
Yeah.
And I was like, I have to, going back, that inspiration, I have to write something in this realm. I'm just inspired. I just want to. I was just exploring big, swelly, reverby sounds and things like that, and piano and all this. So it just like naturally, I'm like, that's not going to happen with the band. It just does not fit, naturally. Right. So I'm going to create Elskavon, really low key. And then that was 2011 when I first put out the first ever Elskavon thing, and I've been writing ever since. But of course, I've launched different monikers since then. But yeah, like I think I wanted to like share that backstory as like a thinking about the different sounds and different styles when it is like clear to me, even if it's not fully clear now. As far as like Blurstem and Elskavon, they kind of related. In my head, it is very clear because like Blurstem was an offshoot because I was writing so much piano music. We had moved into a house and I finally had a real piano at my disposal. And so I was very inspired, but I didn't want to overflood Elskavon with just piano songs, therefore Blurstem. So it is very like just natural outgrowth of like these sounds and monikers. Yeah. But I do wrestle within each moniker. Like, do I try and keep it kind of reined in, or do I kind of mess around? And I kind of just, I don't know, I'm going back to the winging it. I just winging it. So what Elskavon now is way more electronic,
Sure.
Way more rhythmic and a little more experimental than a decade ago when it was more ambient. Although each album release has its own thing. There was like a post-rocky third album for Elskavon. So I think it's just, I don't know, as long as it's, in my mind, it fits this moniker, then I'm good with it. Yeah. It's not fun for me to like stay super stagnant in a sound and a style.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
It's just not. And so that's why the natural birth of different monikers, but also the natural birth within each thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's no rules, man. That's what so like, I guess truth? I would just say like, for those like, wrestling with that, I don't know. I think we all kind of wrestle with that when we're doing our own artist thing.
Yeah.
But as long as you're having fun and like embracing how you're wired and as a creative and your calling, then I don't know, try stuff, Life is short. That's why I'm kind of out with it.
Yeah, no, that's super wise of you, man. And also, yeah, I mean, like, I think you said it in no uncertain terms. So you're just like I just do what's good for me, or I trust that call. And I think, instead of us waiting for permission for someone else to tell us that was good or not good, or for, hey, how did that spike an algorithm, or how did that gain momentum? How did that respond to in the streaming world or the licensing world? But rather like, hey, on the journey as this moniker, this artist, this is the call that I am making for this moment right here, and just trusting that and going with it. I think that is a practice that, even though it sounds really simple, may not be one that is the first item up for bids when people start thinking through their options. And so that's an awesome reminder. And thank you not only for mentioning it, but for modeling it so well and just being a great inspiration and an example to everyone around you, man, for sure.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Thanks for hanging. Appreciate you. Thank you for listening to the All Ambient podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you can catch every conversation we have with all these incredible people who share the same passion. I'm looking forward to the next time, and I hope you are too. Can't wait to see you then, and until then, have an incredible day. Here's hoping this music and the heart behind it makes your day and life that much better. We'll see you next time.